Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very appreciative of you taking your time out of your busy day to spend the time with us to see what we can discover with this show. Recently, in the past 3 or 4 weeks, we have been broadcasting to you different documentaries that were put out by several independent sources. If you did not get to see them, the documentaries were In Plain Sight, Loose Change 1, Loose Change 2, and parts 2 of 3 of a documentary called Zeitgeist, which is German, I believe, for time spirit. Anyway, what we wanted to do, folks, we wanted to honor the victims of 9/11 with broadcasting some truth. A lot of people may find this information very abstract, very shocking, and also if you still care for your nation and the events that took place, you may find yourself actually a bit angry over what was demonstrated to you. Now, we do understand that a lot of this information is very different from what you may have been, you got to think outside the box here. You have to look at the evidence that was presented to you and go forward. And we ask you to go forward by doing your own research. Every show that we do ask everybody, hey, don't believe us, go out and do your own research on this. But what we want to do is we want to continue a little bit. Since them documentaries were made, a lot more information has come forward. A lot of people that are more known to the public, such as actors and athletes and so forth, have come forward. And one of them is Charlie Sheen. Now, Charlie Sheen, you may know, I believe he has a program called 2.5 Men. He is the son of long-term actor Martin Sheen. Now, Charlie Sheen, what he did was he went forward with a video which you can find on the internet called 20 Minutes with the President. And what he did with this was he was requesting a 20-minute sit down with the President. And he also came up with 20 points that Charlie Sheen felt deemed necessary a new investigation and an independent investigation. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. And some people may be asking, gee, why are you going to use Charlie Sheen with regards to demonstrate again that more people are awakening that 9/11 was an inside job. We're also going to get into, gee, Tom, that would take a tremendous amount of funds to pull off an operation such as 9/11, and we're going to actually get into, folks, where some of these funds may have come from. But I'd like to open up first with a couple of historical quotes, as we always do. As anyone who's watched this show knows, what we do is we have 3 formats. We present our evidence in law, we present our evidence in history, and we always have quotes from the people of the day, particularly with whatever event we were discussing. So I want to open up with a quote from Adolf Hitler, and this is from Mein Kampf, and this is a direct quote from Hitler. In the size of the lie, there is always contained a certain factor of credibility, since the great mass of the people will more easily fall victim to a great lie than to a small one. I think what Hitler is saying here is, obviously, they're using lies and facades to take the people down whatever avenue they wish to get them down, whether it would be for going to war, whether it be for giving up all your gold and silver to a foreign entity called the Federal Reserve Bank. Whichever road they want to take you down to, they use lies and deception to get you down there. We have spoken before about the Hegelian dialect. Remember that? Problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem to get the proper reaction that they desire from you. And then, of course, they always provide the solution. And the solution just happens by chance to strengthen their authority, to strengthen their funding, and to restrict and or take away your liberties and freedoms. And we also got into at one time the quote, I believe it was by John Adams, that necessity is the cry of tyrants. We have to do this for your own good. We're implementing all these policies for your own good, to protect you, to make you safe. And you have to, folks, you have to ask yourself relevant questions, okay? And the big one that I always ask when anything, a big event goes on is qui bono. And what that means is who benefited, okay? From the result of the actions that were taken, prior, during, and post the event. who benefited from these events? Did the people of Afghanistan benefit from supposed Osama bin Forgotten supposedly living in a cave and us taking over their country and so forth? Absolutely not. Did the people of Iraq benefit? Absolutely not. We have murdered 1.5 million Iraqis, according to several independent international sources. Okay, so and by the way, folks, Saddam Hussein and or Iraq have never been proving to have anything to do. There's no evidence linking Iraq to the 9/11 events. And for that matter, if you want to go a little deeper to how deep the facade actually goes, I invite you to go to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Just Google FBI's 10 most wanted list, and you will see Osama bin Laden there. And I think he's number 3 or number 4. And what it is, folks, he's not there for 9/11. The FBI's public statement was that there has never been any evidence to link Osama bin Laden to the events of 9/11. What he is wanted by the FBI for is an embassy bombing in Kenya that took place some time ago. Okay, so if we invaded Afghanistan in the pretense of going after Osama bin Laden, who was held up in a bunch of caves, okay, and by the way, folks, Osama bin Laden needs dialysis between every 15 and 19 days. The man is not held up, and they don't have dialysis machines in caves in Bora Bora, Afghanistan, okay? We also at one point got into how Osama bin Laden CIA name is actually Tim Osama, and again, if you go on the internet and you Google Tim Osama CIA asset, you will actually come up with a picture of his CIA identification card. Okay, so you have to look at all the players who's involved here. Okay, and I also have a very hard time believing with all of our technology today that we cannot find Osama bin Laden. Numerous countries have offered to give him up, including Pakistan and Afghanistan. The only thing that Afghanistan asked was that there was evidence demonstrating that Osama bin Laden was linked to the events of 9/11, and like I stated earlier, even according to the FBI, they have never had any evidence of Osama bin Laden being linked to those events. So, with this in mind, I know a lot of this information that we demonstrated to you over the last 4 weeks was very, very upsetting. I have graciously heard comments from people on the street, you know, that saw the shows, and most of them left there bewildered, and they left there angry. And as I told the people that I had the great opportunity to speak with, it's good that you're angry. And the reason why it's good that you're angry is because it means you still care. Okay? You still care about your nation. You still care about the people that were murdered. You still care about the survivors who have had their lives touched at such a detrimental base. So it's good that you're angry. Okay? And the anger process is all part of it. It really is. When you start to understand that you've been lied to, you've been deceived, okay, and also that you were gullible to go with these events, and not to ask questions, okay? And that's what we have this show for, is to present evidence to you that will make you ask questions. And when a lot of times you may not like the answers that you discover, okay? But, you know, the old saying about the truth will set you free. Well, once you start to understand the deception and the lies, folks, you see the lies and deception everywhere, every day, whether it be through the mass media, whether it be through the government programs, whichever. When you wake up and you understand the tools and mechanisms and the avenues that these people use to deceive you, it's in front of you every day, and you can't miss it. I want to go back to a little bit more of Hermann Goering, who was part of the staff of Adolf Hitler. Now, you may ask yourself, gee, you know, a lot of times Tom goes back to Germany, okay? And the reason why we do that is because, folks, we are 1933 Germany right now. The same bankers controlling the same money system, okay? The same laws and language used, even from the 1968 gun bill here in the United States, even to the Homeland Security Acts and the Patriot Acts and all these things. When you research the language of the Nazi regimes from 33 to 45, you find a lot of similarities, if not downright copying of the language that were used by Germans. And you got to understand the German people were a very proud people. You know, they were the atlas of Europe in their culture and their manufacturing. You know, the German people were a very, very proud people. And what took place in Germany is taking place today, particularly with the international bankers devaluing our currency. Okay, but let's go back to, again, Hermann Goering. This is a direct quote from him, and this quote actually came from the Nuremberg trials after World War II. Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in America, nor in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of any country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, a parliament, or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidders of the leaders. That is very easy. All you have to do is tell them that they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Now, what is Hermann Goering saying here to you? Number one, he's telling you that these people do manipulate and fabricate wars. And number two, he's telling you that they did this to the German people. This is how they got the German people to invade Europe and expand the war the way they did and facilitate the war and to send their sons off to war, okay? You know, a lot of times you look back at the Civil War of our country, or the war between the states, or the war of northern aggression, whatever you want to call it. Not to jump around too much, but I want you to think of something, folks. Only 6% of the people in the United States owned slaves prior to the Civil War. Only 6%. Now, would you have allowed your sons, or would you have gone to war, left your farm and family, and gone to war to protect the right of 6%, the rich and the elite of the South and or North, because slavery did exist in some parts of the North, to go to war for that? Absolutely not. Okay, but when you look at the history books today, what do they teach you? Oh, that was about to facilitate, you know, freeing the black man. And as we've got into, folks, on this program, they didn't free anybody. Lincoln owned right in state. He did not have the right to interfere, nor did he desire to interfere with the right of slavery. Okay, now slavery obviously was wrong, was inhumane, and against everything that this nation is supposed to stand for. But what is it that, with history again, that they'll have you believe that the Civil War is about freeing a particular group of people, when you look at the hard facts and you read the journals and letters so forth of the soldiers from the South who did go, that was a non-mention. They were fighting for the rights of state sovereignty over federal imperialism and encroachment. But the history books today will show you a totally different thing. And, you know, it's just like that famous quote with Napoleon Bonaparte, which we have used on the show before, that history is agreed upon lies by the victors. Okay, and this is what we have to get by, folks, because history is being made today. The future of our country is being manifested today. And where are we going to go with this? Are we going to go as a true free republic? Or are we going to continue down the road from a statutory democracy into corporatism and finally into a fascist dictatorship? Very, very important that you understand that that's where we are today. So with that being said, and I want to just do a quick review of 9/11 because I know the documentaries that we have showed presently were very upsetting to a lot of people. I think a lot of people enjoyed the information so much. I think they were shocked by the information. The thing that also got me in talking to different people was that a lot of folks said to me, boy, you know, I remembered seeing a lot of that footage. You know, and when I saw the footage, you know, and like particularly the flashes that happened in both the Twin Towers prior to impact of the aircraft, you know. And a lot of the footage, folks, that you may have seen once and it was taken, never shown again. For instance, all the people that were in the lower basements of the World Trade Centers, you know, talking about all the explosions that went off underneath the ground level. you know, down in the basement levels. Okay, obviously that wasn't part of, you know, the planes hitting up on in the 84th and 88th floors. No, that was the explosions going off to take out the center column so the whole thing would collapse. Because if you think about it, folks, if you want to say, okay, the pancake theory, where the trusses gave way and we had this pancaking effect, the 47 steel columns would still be standing. Think about it. They would still be upright and still standing. They weren't, and the reason why they weren't is because the demolitions that were put in there had taken out the center columns. The firemen, all talking about one fireman says, you know, the boom, boom, boom effect in plain sight, like they plan to take down a building. You know, the other ones talk about the molten metal coming down the rails like it was a foundry. Now, these are all New York City firemen who had lost a lot of brothers, 343 in that fire, okay, in that whole event. They were murdered, all right, for the gain of the bankers. And a lot of these firemen have now come forward. These documentaries that we presented to you were actually, they were all very time sensitive because as time went on, more information came forward and more people came forward. But the other thing was, this was the beginning. Okay, this is when in plain sight, when information just started coming out, private investigators doing the research, okay? So you've got to understand that, you know, that was 8 years ago. And a lot more information has come forward, including EMS workers, including firefighters, including policemen, okay? Including people in the military have come forward, eyewitnesses, footage, radio transcripts. Okay, why did it take 3 years for the city of New York to release the firefighters' radio transcripts? 3 years. It finally took a class action lawsuit by some of the survivors to get this out. And I'm going to tell you the reason why, folks, is because the firemen are on their radio reporting to their commanders and their incident commanders and scene commanders at different levels, battalions and so forth. They're all talking about secondary explosions, all of them. And that's the reason why it took 3 years for these tapes to be released. Now, you can go on the internet and you can listen to all of them. It is rather lengthy, I will tell you that. You will be sitting there for hours and hours on end. But if you take the time to do that, you will see on multiple occasions from various firefighters there at different levels of the building, outside, inside, and so forth, reporting to their incident commanders that we have secondary explosions. There was one, I believe it was in Loose Change, where the battalion chief who was in charge of the safety officer for the New York City Fire Department at that scene actually started to withdraw his men, and the reason why, and I quote, was because he believed that there were planted devices inside the building. Okay, now that was broadcast once, I believe, on NBC and never broadcast again. But if you watch that documentary again, Loose Change, you will see it's in there. Jamie McIntyre, CNN, one of their top echelon reporters, showing up at the Pentagon and reporting that he sees no sign of a plane crash here. This report, it must be a false report because there is no fuselage, there is no plane, there's no seats, there's no bodies, there is nothing that would resemble a plane, a 757 crashing into the Pentagon, okay? Why were all the cameras that surrounded the Pentagon, the hotel, the Citgo station, the highway department, that all would have showed the plane coming into the Pentagon, all the cameras that were on the Pentagon? Why was that never released? The reason why, it didn't happen. Okay? How do you get a 124-foot, 10-inch wingspan into a 16-foot hole? Think of that. I mean, if anything is going to make you ask questions, I want you to think of that. 124-foot and 10-inch wingspan into a 16-foot hole. It doesn't happen. Okay? Not even Houdini could have pulled that off. So again, think about what we're saying to you. Just don't take this information and, you know, I know it's hard to swallow because you've been lied to, and you've been swallowing lies for most of your lives. Okay? You didn't understand the money system, and if you've been watching this show, now you do. You understand what we have for money and what we don't have for money. You understand from the Coinage Acts that we reviewed what our money is supposed to be and, of course, what it is not. Okay? So look at this at face value. Don't just go after the messenger. Listen to the message, please. And I think you will find the deception in front of you every day. Now, I want to get into some other things that have come out lately, and this is just one thing. This is FBI agent Warren Flagg, because a reporter had asked him, hey, you know, within 2 hours of 9/11 happening, you had all 19 people accounted for, you knew the organization, blah, 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 all this good stuff. So FBI agent Warren Flagg answers, how do we know that the government was able to identify all 19 hijackers almost immediately after the attacks? They were identified through those papers in the luggage, and that's how it was known so soon that Al-Qaeda was behind the hijackings. Okay. Now, you go to Maine, where Muhammad Atta was supposed to go on and all this, and you find out that Muhammad Atta's bags never got checked into the planes. His luggage was the only passenger's luggage that didn't make the flight. Now, I want you to think of that. First of all, the FBI doesn't have Osama bin Laden on wanted for the events of 9/11 because, according to their own statements, they have no evidence linking him to it. And the only stipulation they have of how they found all this stuff out was because of the luggage. Folks, according to the airport and according to the airline itself, his luggage never made the aircraft. If you look at the manifest, folks, for the flights, zero of these 19 potential hijackers are on the manifest, not one. Now, you may say, oh, they might have used fake names. There's not one Muslim and or Middle Eastern name on any of the flight manifest, okay? And you also got to understand, folks, that 9 of the 19 hijackers have been confirmed alive. You actually watched statements from interviews from 7 of them with some of the videos that we just showed you. So again, more lies and more deception. So I just want to repeat Hitler again here. In the size of the lie, there is always contained a certain factor of credibility, since the great masses of the people will easily fall victim to a great lie than a small one. Okay? Now, that really, really is an incredible statement, and if ever 9/11 was a small or a large event, obviously a very large event, okay? Now, this is from Ross Wittenberg, who flew over 100 combat missions in Vietnam. He was also a commercial pilot for Pan Am and United for 35 years. And this is his quote: "The bottom line is that all wars are contrived. Rich bankers and financiers will pull the strings to pull their horrific events like 9/11 and Pearl Harbor into motion. It seems bizarre, but truth are facts." So you've got to understand here this Russ Wittenberg got into very heavily how these pilots could not do what was claimed to be done. The aircraft was not capable of doing these maneuvers at such G's and everything else, much too much to what we have time to get into today. But you got a guy who flew over 100 combat missions in Vietnam and then flew as a civilian pilot for 35 years. You would have a good understanding that he knows what he's speaking of, okay? Now, there was a quote here that I was going to get into about Condoleezza Rice, and it's rather lengthy. But do you remember when Condoleezza Rice said that, you know, we are going to, no one could have conceived that imagined suicide bombers were burrowing into our society, then emerging on the same day to fly their aircrafts, the U.S. aircrafts, into a building full of innocent people. This is a new kind of war, and we were going to demonstrate our evidence to the American people forthcoming. Folks, that evidence has never been presented. Think of that. Besides them going on a television screen and saying Muhammad Atta did this, have you ever seen one link of evidence presented to you regarding 9/11, linking Osama bin Laden? No, they give you these fabricated little footage episodes from a cave, and even people within the FBI and so forth have stated that, you know, this was a facade. No evidence was linked between Osama bin Laden, even by the FBI's testimony. So again, you have to ask these questions, folks. You know, if they didn't do it, and 9 of the 19 hijackers have been confirmed alive, who did? Qui bono? Who benefited? Okay. So now, we talked about Charlie Sheen's statement earlier, and I'm just going to get into this real briefly, and I want to just give you what he wrote to the president, and then we're going to get into, he actually came out with 20 points that he wanted to demonstrate to the president why, in fact, there was a new investigation needed. So as the 8th anniversary of 9/11 approaches, what doesn't make sense to us in that media outlets choose to impugn the character of the signatories rather than carry out their responsibility as watchdogs to carry attention to as the yet unanswered questions raised about the events of 9/11. 5 years later, we challenge you to finally print those same unanswered questions and pursue their answers with the same vigor with which you pursued the signatories. In other words, what he's saying here is that the people who were delivering the questions, the messengers, they attacked the messengers rather than addressing the questions, okay? We can no longer allow these cowards and shills to contaminate the reservoirs of truth. In addition to their slanderous folly, they have ignored my very public challenge to debate on Larry King Live. If these cockroaches had but one shred of courage, they would embrace this opportunity. What he's talking about here, folks, is Charlie Sheen had made contact with the producers of Larry King. We all know who Larry King is, and wanted to have a live debate. He was willing to debate anybody on the events of 9/11. Imagine that. There were no takers. Now, you would think if the truth was on the side of the government, they would jump all over that. But they can't, because the truth is not on the side of the government. And he gets into some of the things that upset him, with like Tucker Carlson attacking David Ray Griffin. David Ray Griffin, former CIA agent, physicist Stephen E. Jones, excuse me. And what Stephen Jones did was he came forward about the metallurgy and the molten metal and the thermite that was found, which you saw that through the programs that we played for you. And this is exactly what he was talking about when he got to this point, okay? So then he says here, now this is to the president, I really wish that there were the case, sir. Are you aware, Mr. President, of the recent stunning revelations that 60% of the 9/11 commissioners have publicly stated that the government agreed not to tell the truth about 9/11 and that the Pentagon was engaged in a deliberate deception about their response to the attack? Now, folks, what he's talking about here, and you probably didn't see this on the mainstream media, is that 6 out of the 10 investigators, or commissioners, if you would, of the 9/11 commission have gone public saying they were lied to, evidence was withheld from them, okay, and that they believe that the whole thing was a cover-up, and also that they want another independent criminal investigation with regards to the cover-up. Now, I want you to think about that. These are the people on the inside. These are the people who supposedly had, the truth given to them, the evidence presented to them. Now, we've gone over some of the things at 9/11. Number one, there was no crime scene at the World Trade Center. That's right, there was no crime scene. All the metal started to be shipped out on September 13th to the countries of China and India. And I want you to think about that. I've talked to some merchant marines friends of mine. They're active and currently active, and some retired. And they all said to me, they gave me about a 2 to 3 week window, depending on where these ships were coming from, to sail from India and or China to get to New York. Folks, how did these ships know to go to New York on September 13th to collect all of this metal? Think about that. That had to be arranged months prior, That wasn't just, that they just couldn't just call them up on September 11th and say, hey, get here. We've signed this contract. We have a bunch of metal for you. No. It took them at least 2 weeks float time to get to New York. Costco, Chinese Overseas Shipping Company, and so forth. Okay? So how did that take place? Why is it that there wasn't a secured crime scene? Okay? Why was it that all of the metallurgy tests and that discovered the thermite and all that, why wasn't that put in the public eye? Because independent people did this, not the government. The government was there to cover things up. And of course, to get the best bang for their buck, because they created this situation, now they're looking for the big reaction from you, okay? You know, thousands murdered, 343 firefighters killed in the line of duty, okay? What they were looking for, you remember George Bush with the battalion chief sitting there? He had lost all his men, standing there with his arm around him with the bullhorn, you know? That was to get you enraged. That was to get you, oh, we got to go get him. We got to go get him. Okay? That's what this is all about. Again, problem, reaction, solution. So there's a thing here, statements of John Farmer. He was a senior counsel on the 9/11 Commission. And this is quite a statement that he makes, but again, for the sake of time, I'm going to narrow this down. Now, again, this is John Farmer, senior counsel to the 9/11 Commission, and this is a quote from him in his own public statement. "I was shocked how different the truth was from the way it was described." Think of that. I want you to, let me do that again. "I was shocked how different the truth was from the way it was described." Okay? And that speaks to itself. This is a gentleman who, you know, again, was on the inside, and he's telling you he was lied to. Okay? So, the next document reads, "Disclassified stage provocations." And again, this is Charlie Sheen to the President. "Honestly, Mr. President, I wish I was making this stuff up. I am certain that you are familiar with the USS Maine incident, the sinking of the Lusitania, which we all know brought us into World War I, and of course the most famous incident, the Gulf of Tonkin." We're going to get into some of these things here right off the bat, and what he's talking about here, folks, is false flag operations, which we're going to get into. Okay? He also goes on, "Mr. President, as you know, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it, and I concede to you, sir, these events are in the past. No argument, sir. I am merely inviting you to acknowledge some credibility to the pattern or the theme. Case in point, the next document he gets into is in the folder was a project for the new American century and is entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses." Now, we're going to get into that here in a little bit, but before we do that, we're going to get into the project for New American Century. But what I'd like to do right now is get into some things that you might have found a little bit misgiving. And first of all was that the supposed black boxes of the aircraft were not found. First time in history. You know, you got 8 black boxes, you know, 4 aircraft, 2 each, who none of them found. So you were told. First time in history that ever happened. Listen to this. Again, events come out as time goes on. In November of 2004, New York firefighters Mike Baloney and Nicholas DeMasi went public to say they had found black boxes at the World Trade Center, but were told to keep their mouths shut by the FBI agents. Nicholas DeMasi said that he escorted federal agents on an all-terrain vehicle in October of 2001 and helped them locate the devices, a story backed by rescue volunteer Mike Belloni. Very, very interesting that you know, you'd get that quote from people. After all, we were all told that, in fact, the black boxes were never found. And I'm going to ask you, who are you going to believe? Because obviously someone's lying to you. Who are you going to believe? You're going to believe the bankers and their government cronies? Or are you going to believe firefighters who just lost 343 brothers and who risked their lives every day to save others? Who is more honorable in your eye? That's who you're going to believe once you answer that question. Okay, so let's get into his 20 points here. And again, he goes on, "I thank you, Mr. President. First, one of the FBI's most wanted list, Osama bin Laden, is not charged with the crimes of 9/11. When I called the FBI to ask them why this was the case, they replied, there is no evidence to link bin Laden to the crime scene." He goes on, "I later discovered he had never been indicted by the Department of Justice for any events or links to the events of 9/11. So, why did we invade Afghanistan? Okay. Number 2, FBI translator Sybil Edmonds, and please go on the internet and Google Sybil Edmonds, very, very courageous woman. And she is the stuff that FBI agents should be made up of. FBI translator Sybil Edmonds was dismissed and gagged by the Department of Justice after she revealed that the government had foreknowledge of plans to attack the American cities using planes as bombs as early as April of 2001. In July of 2009, Ms. Edmonds broke the federal gag order and went public to reveal that Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, or Al-CIA as it's called, and the Taliban were all working for and with the CIA up until the day of the events of 9/11. How can we tie that together? Again, the identification of Osama bin Laden as Tim Osama, an FBI asset. Again, we invite you to go on the internet and Google that. Number 3, the following is a quote from Mayor Giuliani during an interview at 9/11 with Peter Jennings of ABC News, and this is Giuliani speaking. I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there where the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, and the head of emergency management, and we were operating out of there when we were told the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building, so we were trapped in the building for 10 to 15 minutes, finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us. Now, you have to ask yourself, folks, how they know the building was coming down. In the history of steel-structured buildings, not one had ever collapsed before. And who told him? Who told him that to this day, we don't know who told him to get out. And Charlie Sheen goes on, who told him this? To this day, the answer to this question remains unanswered, completely ignored and emphatically denied by Mayor Giuliani on several public occasions. Folks, we have this on film. He did make the statement. Who told him? How did they know? Number 4, in April 2004, USA Today reported in 2 years before the September 11 attacks, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, you know that as NORAD, conducted exercises simulating what the White House says was unimaginable at the time. Hijacked airliners used as weapons to crash into targets and cause mass casualties. One of the targets was, in this exercise, was the World Trade Center. You remember Condoleezza Rice's statement about no one had any idea this was ever going to happen? We couldn't imagine this type of event? More lies. Number 5, September 12, 2007, CNN Anderson's Cooper 360 reported that the mysterious white plane spotted and videotaped by multiple media outlets, you did see that in the footage we presented to you, flying in a restricted airspace over the White House shortly before 10 a.m. on the morning of 9/11 was in fact an Air Force E-4B, a specially modified Boeing 747 with communication pods behind the cockpit, otherwise known as the Doomsday Plane. Okay, this, folks, was probably their aerial command center. Okay, this is how they took control of the aircraft that left Boston. All right, and now the other thing you got to understand about the Pentagon and the White House, folks, is that they have as you could imagine, a very sophisticated defense system, with missiles and so forth. So if it's a restricted airspace and you fly into that airspace, obviously these missiles are automatically activated, and they could shoot down whatever before there was a danger to anybody and or the facilities. Well, why would a civilian airliner that took off out of Boston, this one would have taken off out of New York, have the encryption codes to go through the airspace to hit the Pentagon? Now, if you want to still believe that these 19 hijackers did that, you still have to ask yourself, well, how did the 19 hijackers get the encryption codes to the Pentagon? So they wouldn't get shot down by the missile system. Even if you still want to believe that, you've got to come to the realization that if that was true, they had inside help to get these encryption codes. Interesting thought. Number 6, 3 F-16s assigned to Andrews Air Force Base, 10 miles from Washington, D.C., are conducting training exercise in North Carolina, 207 miles away as the first plane crashes into the WTC. Even at significantly less than their top speed of 1,500 miles an hour, folks, I can tell you right now, I'm a bit of an aviation enthusiast, and these modern F-16s can fly a little bit over that, but he's using this. 1,500 miles an hour. They could still have defended the skies over Washington well before 9 a.m., more than 37 minutes before Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon. However, they did not return until 9:55, and why? Because the event was over. That's the reason why. Okay. Andrews Air Force Base had no armed fighters on alert and ready to take off in the morning of 9/11, which was unprecedented. That's their task there is defense of Washington, D.C. Unprecedented. Okay. Number 7, the WTC Building 7, watch the video of its collapse. Folks, the Building 7 was not hit by any airplanes. It was the command center of Giuliani, CIA, IRS, and other entities of the government, federal government, and local governments. And this building collapsed upon itself, and it was not even mentioned in the 9/11 Commissioner's report. Can you imagine that? They didn't even mention it. You know why they didn't mention it? Because they couldn't substantiate the pancake theory with regards to this building. It was not hit by a plane. It just fell upon itself. As you've seen, with regards to the documentaries that we have presented to you, the other thing was the BBC reporting 20 minutes before Building 7 collapsed that it had collapsed. And you can, Google that. I'm not too sure that was on any of the documentaries we presented to you, but Google BBC reports Building 7 collapsed prior to actually collapse, and you'll see in the background of the window that the woman's reporting from, the building's still standing, and she's reporting that it had already collapsed. That was a mistake on their part. They just had their timing off. Number 8, Flight 93 is the fourth plane to crash on 9/11 at 10:03 a.m. Vice President Cheney only gives shoot-down order at 10 to 10:20 a.m., and this is not communicated to NORAD until 28 minutes after Flight 93 has crashed. Fueling further suspicion on this front is that the fact that 3 months before the attack of 9/11, Dick Cheney usurped control of NORAD, and therefore he and no one else on planet Earth had the power to call for military strikes on the hijacked aircrafts of 9/11. He did not exercise that power. 3 months after 9/11, he relinquished command of NORAD and returned it to his military operation. What he's talking about here, folks, is that whoever was in charge of NORAD, if he deemed there was a specific threat to any part of the country, whether it be military, civilian, whichever, the commander of NORAD, whoever it had to be at that time, had the authority and or power to initiate strikes against that threat, that potential threat, whichever it may be. Okay? So what Dick Cheney did in July, 3 months prior to 9/11, actually about 2.5 months prior, is he stripped NORAD of that ability, of that power, and gave it to himself. Now, why do you think Dick Cheney and George Bush had to testify together? There was no records being kept. There was no notes that were kept. There was no recordings that were kept. There was no witnesses that were going to be there during this investigation. Okay? And the reason why is because they didn't trust George Bush. They felt that with his babbling, that he would give away information that they did not want out there. And that's why the 9/11 Commission had to meet these two together under them pretenses. They weren't going to do it any other way. Very, very important that you understand that. And what he's talking about here is why in the history of NORAD, 2.5 months prior to the events of 9/11, did Dick Cheney take it unto himself to change that authority, which had worked so well for the country all these years, and then after the events of 9/11, just give it back to him? Now, we also get into the fact that it was an Air Force person, and I forget his name right now, who came out after his time of service was up with the Air Force, who was in the bunker, if you would, when this all went down, and he inquired to Dick Cheney on 2 occasions, does this order still stand not to shoot? And Dick Cheney snaps back at him using language that I can't use here on TV, that have I changed my orders? No, and the order stands. He didn't say it quite that light. It was a much more heavy statement. Okay. Number 9, Scores of mainstream media outlets reported that the FBI conducted an investigation of at least 5 of the 9/11 hijackers being trained at U.S. military schools. These investigations are now sealed and need to be declassified. Folks, none of these people, of these supposed hijackers, could fly a 757. I think that was demonstrated quite well to you in the documentaries that we presented to you. They actually sat down with the person who was in charge of the flight school that supposedly one of the pilots, hijack pilots, went to, and again, demonstrated quite well that they couldn't even fly a Cessna, never mind flying a 757 into maneuvers that a pilot with 100 combat missions and 35 years of civilian aircraft experience say could not have happened. So it's, again, more lies and more deception. Number 10 we had gone over a little bit earlier, but I want to repeat it for you. I think it's quite important. In 2004, New York firefighters Mike Baloney and Nicholas DeMasi went public to say they had found the black boxes at the World Trade Center, but were told to keep their mouths shut by FBI agents. Nicholas DeMasi said that he escorted federal agents on an all-terrain vehicle and helped them to locate the devices, a story backed up by volunteer rescuer Mike Baloney. So again, very, very important. We were told that they never did find the black boxes, but in fact they did. Okay. Number 11 here. Hundreds of eyewitnesses include first responders, fire captains, news reports, police, and all describe multiple explosions in both towers before and during the collapse. We obviously went over that before, and if you had watched these previous 4 shows, I think that was demonstrated quite well to you. The thermite, and how they did it, on September 6th, when all the bomb-sniffing dogs were taken out, when they had a complete shutdown, and who was behind the security company of the WTC up until September 10th. Very, very important. Number 12, an astounding video uncovered from the archives shows BBC News correspondent Jane Stanley reporting on the collapse of WTC Building 7 over 20 minutes before it fell at 5:20 p.m. on the afternoon of 9/11. Tapes from earlier BBC broadcasts show news anchors discussing the collapse of WT7 a full 26 minutes in advance of the event actually taking place. Okay, so what they did was, okay, they're part of the paradigm of lies, obviously, and what they did was they made a mistake in their timing, and actually not in their timing of broadcasting this event. They were creating the event, but they should have waited until the building actually collapsed. And again, don't forget, folks, this building was hit by no planes, nothing, had small pockets of fire in it, and why was that not brought together by the 9/11 Commission? Okay, and who told the BBC that building was going to collapse? Okay, number 13, Solicitor General Ted Olson's claims that him and his wife Barbara Olson called him twice from Flight 77, describing hijackers with box cutters, was a central plank in the official 9/11 story. However, the credibility of the story was completely undermined after Olson kept changing his story about whether his wife used her cell phone or the airplane phone. The technology to enable cell phones from high-altitude airline flights was not created until 2004. American Airlines confirmed that Flight 77 was a Boeing 757 and that this plane did not have airplane phones on board. I remember the article in 2004 saying that you can now use cell phones in flight, and because there's no record of the phones being made, of the phone calls being made, folks. There's no record of it. Zero. Okay? So you have to ask yourself, again, more lies, more deception. Number 14, the size of a Boeing 757 is approximately 125 feet in width. It's actually 124 and 10 inches like we described earlier, and yet images of the impact zone of the Pentagon supposedly caused by the crash merely show a hole no more than 16 feet in diameter. We've gotten into this. He goes on quite lengthy about this, but we got into this earlier, folks. You cannot get a 757 into a 16-foot hole. It just doesn't work out. Okay. Number 15, what is the meaning behind the following quote attributed to Dick Cheney, which came to light during the 9/11 Commission's hearings? The passage is taken from testimony given by the Secretary of Transportation, Norman Mineta. this is Dick Cheney, during the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, there was a young man who could come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man, this is the Air Force gentleman I was speaking to of earlier, the young man said to the vice president, do your orders still stand? And the president turned and whipped his neck around in vulgar language and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? As the plane was not shot down, in addition to the fact that the armed fighter jets were nowhere near the plane and the Pentagon defense system was not activated, are we to take that the orders were to let the plane find its target? Absolutely. Absolutely. Dick Cheney, who was in charge, and forget he put himself in charge in July, he issued them orders. He let that plane hit the Pentagon, and of course, as we all know, it hit the part of the Pentagon where they were in construction. There wasn't a lot of people there, and Mr. Rumsfeld was safely exactly on 180 degrees on the other side of the Pentagon building, which, by the way, folks, they flew around the Pentagon and hit that side of it. Number 16, in May of 2003, the Miami Herald reported how the Bush administration was refusing to release a 900-page congressional report on 9/11 because it wanted to avoid enshrining embarrassment details in the report, particularly regarding the pre-9/11 warnings, as well as the fact that the hijackers were trained at United States flight schools. And folks, when you look where these schools are, they're right next door to Langley, Virginia, home of the CIA. Number 17, top Pentagon officials canceled their flights for September 11th and on September 10th. San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, following a security warning, canceled a flight into New York that was scheduled for the morning of 9/11. You know, more digging into this fact, folks, and we discovered that it was Condoleezza Rice who made the call to Willie Brown and told him not to fly to New York on that day. Again, Condoleezza Rice, the one who came forward and said that, you know, we could never have imagined this type of attack taking place. She also made the comment that evidence will be forthcoming to the American people, which has never taken place. Number 18, the technology to enable cell phones from high-altitude airline flights was not created until 2004, and even by that point, it was only in the trial phase. Calls from cell phones were formed an integral part of the official government version of events were technologically impossible at the time. And again, I say to you again that there are no records by the phone companies of these billing statements, again, of these calls being made, okay? And you know, you saw in one where one of the gentlemen was supposedly talking to his mother and he gave his full name. I mean, you know, when do you speak to your mom? Hey, Mom, this is Tom D'Ambra. I mean, come on, it's just ludicrous. Number 19, on April 29, 2004, President Bush and Vice President Cheney would only meet the commission under specific clandestine conditions. They insisted on testifying together and not under oath. They also demanded that their testimony be treated as a matter of state secret, and to this date, nothing they spoke on that day exists in the public domain. Of course it don't, and I want to tell you the reason why. There was no recordings, there was no transcripts, there was no witnesses, there was no notes. And also, they were never put under oath. Why would that be? Because once they were found to be under oath, and found to be lying, there was potential for perjury charges. The reason being. Finally, Mr. President, a few days after the attack, several newspapers as well as the FBI reported that a paper passport had been found in the ruins of WTC. In August of 2004, CNN reported that the hijacker Ziad Jahari visa was found in the remains of Flight 93, which went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Okay? Folks, think about this. This fire supposedly could melt reinforced metal, 47 steel girders, holding a building up of, you know, multiple flights in the air, the tallest buildings in the world. But yet, this paper passport, which the gentleman supposedly had on him, went through his clothing, went through the fireball, fell 88 flights to the ground, debris everywhere, and where'd they find it? In fine condition, a paper instrument. But yet, this fire melted metal. It just doesn't add up. And if he went farther with this, you'd find out that when the gentleman was alive, the guy was actually living in Saudi Arabia, whose passport they said they found. We have the evidence. We can link these people. Okay? The guy was alive. He made public statements about it. So we can go on here, folks. I've got sheets and sheets of evidence that has come out post-event and after the documentaries that we presented to you. And again, we understand a lot of this information is very abstract. It's very shocking to you. But we do ask you to ask yourself, key bono, who benefited, okay? And you say, well, how they benefit? Do you think the Patriot Acts and the Homeland Security Acts would have been approved on with Congress if this event didn't take place? Of course, folks, the Patriot Acts were written prior to 9/11, okay? The Congress was not allowed to read them prior to voting on them, according to multiple congressmen and senators' offices, okay? They voted on it ignorantly through pure emotion. Problem, reaction, solution. Again, they created the problem, they got the reaction they desired from the people, and they provided the solution by restricting your liberties, taxing you more, and going forward with their lies and deception. And that's exactly what the events of 9/11 were. So the next time someone tries to talk to you about the events of 9/11 with questions, don't just rebuke the messenger, because that person is caring enough about the future of his country to facilitate to you the questions and the information that person went out on his own to discover. So with that being said, folks, again, we thank you very, very much for your time in watching our program. We do know that some of this information is startling you, but again, we ask you to do your own research. And with the advent of the internet, obviously, it's a lot easier to do that today. So in closing, as always, we say to you, thank you, and remember that your government is your responsibility.